So things are much, much better than they used to be 25 years ago. There's lots of progress. There's absolutely lots of progress. The lives of the people in Lakshadweep are actually improving a lot. And that is thanks to the amount of inputs that the government is putting, amount of hard work that the people in the Lakshadweep have put in over the last 25 years. There's a huge amount of progress that has happened. Okay? And change is coming. Change is coming very fast. You can see it. Right? That every year you'll find that there's high-speed internet that is going to come. Okay, so next year everyone will be watching YouTube videos and Netflix series when the this optical cable comes. Okay, there's smart city projects for Kavaratti, which is going to transform the islands. Okay, there is to meet energy demands, alternate energy kind of projects that are coming into the islands as well, with solar panels and everything else planned. There are desalination plants that are being planned. You know about the desalination plants we already have, but other islands are going to get the desalination plants as well to meet the water requirements of Lakshadweep. And on some of these, there are large airports being developed. The one airport in Agatti is being expanded. There are new airports coming up in Minikoi, and all of these facilities are going to bring new tourists to the islands. And some of these remote islands are going to be building fancy tourist resorts where all the tourists will go, making it into a world-class tourism destination like the Maldives. Right? So all of these are plans that you've been hearing about. Fisheries production is going to be promoted much, much more. So today, fisheries is extremely important in Lakshadweep, but it's being promoted much, much more so that you'll get even more fish. Okay, and so all these are changes that are happening a lot. In these islands that I thought would never change, change is coming very, very, very quickly. Okay? And it's clear that if I come 25 years from now, Lakshadweep will probably be a place that I would not recognize. Okay? And so I think that all these changes are good. And all of that is basically because of this huge investment in infrastructure. There's a huge amount of infrastructure that is, you know what infrastructure means, right? Okay, it means roads, it means, new factories, it means bringing in a whole lot of different technologies, all of that. What I want to talk to you about today is a different kind of infrastructure. Okay? I want to talk to you today about a certain invisible infrastructure, which is the ecological infrastructure. This ecological infrastructure is there, which is invisible. It's there, it's around you everywhere. Okay? And it is absolutely necessary for keeping Lakshadweep alive today. Okay? This is a grand infrastructure project that is happening in the waters of the Lakshadweep. Okay? And it has been going, this infrastructure project has been going on for at least 1 million years. Okay? And it is absolutely critical to survival of all of you. Okay? All of you are not yet 20. Okay? When you are, by the time you become adults, okay, all of you are more or less young adults now, but when you become, when you're at an employment age, this is the infrastructure that is going to be absolutely necessary for you for survival on these islands. And what I will argue is that this is the infrastructure that we need to protect even more than all those other grand infrastructural projects that are coming along. Okay? I think that's what I want to try and argue today. And what is that ecological infrastructure? What exactly is that? This is the grand infrastructure project I want to talk about. Do you know what this is? So this is not just any coral. This is one individual coral. Okay? This is one animal. It's only one animal. It is about 15 meters from one side to another. If I swim, it takes me from one side to another and everything changes. It starts at 5 meters and it goes down to something like 14 meters. Okay? This particular animal is much older than me, certainly much older than you. Okay? It is about 600 to 700 years old. Okay? So, or probably even older, maybe about 800 years old. When the first people of the Lakshadweep came to the islands, this coral may just have been born. Okay? And it has been there all the time. It's one of my favorite corals. It has been found, you can see it in Agatti. In Kadmat. Have any of you gone to Kadmat? Yeah. So if you go to the eastern side of Kadmat, okay, and you swim out from the southern part of from the eastern beach, okay, and you just snorkel a little bit outside the reef, you will come across this animal. Okay, and I keep calling it an animal. Okay, and this is part of that ecological infrastructure that has been for the last 600 or 700 years, been constantly producing enough of material to keep the island safe. First of all, build the island and keep the island safe. Okay, and I will try to explain a little bit about what that means. And this is not the only one. There are millions and millions of these little individual corals. Some of them small, not all of them as large as this. Many of them are much smaller than this. Okay, but all of them together are actually working like a factory. They're working like a factory that is together producing this infrastructure that I'm talking about. Okay, which is much, much grander than any of the other infrastructures that are being planned for the Lakshadweep right now. So if I look at that a little bit, okay, I'll show you another coral. This is a coral. And people often ask me, is a coral a plant? Is it an animal? Or is it a stone? Many people think over here it's called bara, right? And bara is stone, right? So is it a plant, is it an animal, or is it some kind of a stone? And the interesting thing is that the coral is all three of them. It is an animal, it's a plant, and it is a stone at the same time. And how is that possible? If I look very, very closely at that same animal, and I go closely, you see that it has all these mouths. Okay, the coral is full, has all these mouths, and it feeds. It is feeding on other small animals that are living in the water, and through the day it is feeding. And the entire coral is made up of these very, very small mouths. All of them are really, really tiny. Most coral, you won't see them out during the day. You'll see them only at night. But this particular coral, it's called Coniopora. It comes out, it feeds even during the day. But if I were to look inside it, this is what I will find. Okay, that's a picture of what the coral looks as a cross section. I just cut it along the side, and in this animal, okay, it has a kind of tissue, and inside the tissue lives a plant. Okay, that plant is called zooxanthellae. Don't bother about the name, but that plant will take sunlight, and you know what plants do with sunlight, right? They do photosynthesis, right? So because of photosynthesis, it gets a lot of nutrition, gets all the gets the energy from sunlight, and converts that into food. And that food is given to the coral. So the coral is able to feed. It feeds on its own, but 90% of the food that the coral gets, it gets from that plant. Okay, so it's a plant living together in close symbiosis. Again, that's a term that you've probably heard. Okay, with an animal. And what does a coral do? It takes that energy, okay, and it combines that with minerals from the water, and it produces a skeleton of calcium carbonate. Okay, so it's a special kind of calcium carbonate, which is called aragonite, but it creates the calcium carbonate, and therefore it's a plant that is living together with an animal that is creating a mineral. Okay, that's why the coral is all three of them together. Now, this mineral is laid down. Okay, when you have lots and lots of these corals and are constantly producing this calcium carbonate. Essentially, calcium carbonate is like cement. Okay, it is producing the cement and building the coral reef. Okay, and that coral reef eventually forms along an old. Do you know how the Lakshadweep was formed? Does anybody know how the Lakshadweep was formed? Exactly, but so that's how the corals. This is how the corals form cement. But how are the Lakshadweeps themselves formed? So what happens? Let me tell you. So in the many years ago, okay, several million years ago, there was an old volcano. Okay, a volcano which is active. It was an active volcano. And around that volcano, you can see in yellow, all those corals that I showed you that was producing cement, produced a coral reef around it. Okay. In time, that old volcano went below the sea. It stopped becoming an active volcano and went below the sea. But the corals kept growing. Okay. The corals kept growing, and eventually, the old volcano is right at the bottom. Okay, more than a kilometer deep. But around it is all coral. That means all that you can see that is yellow, okay, is all the coral. So the reason that you have, if you dig 1 kilometer deep inside the middle of the lagoon, you might find some old volcano. Okay, so the coral atoll of Lakshadweep lies on top of an old volcano built over by millions of years of coral. The islands themselves are very young. The islands are about 6 to 8,000 years old. Okay, but that old volcano is extremely old. And where did Lakshadweep get born? The Lakshadweep got born somewhere in the southern part of the Indian Ocean. Okay, that went over. Have you heard of Reunion Island? It's in the southern part of the Indian Ocean, full of active volcanoes, and those volcanoes came up all the way to where Lakshadweep is right now. And below Lakshadweep, you have Lakshadweep, then you have Maldives, and below that you have Chagos. You have this whole chain of mountains. It's all part of the same chain of volcanic islands that eventually form this what is called a submarine ridge. Okay? So that's just to give you some kind of background of where Lakshadweep was born, okay, and how important the corals are to Lakshadweep itself, because the reefs actually help the Lakshadweep Islands form, and it protects the atolls around. Okay. So the first time I came to Lakshadweep was sometime in 1996. Okay. And as a young coral researcher, the Lakshadweep was among the most beautiful places I've seen. I've not seen any coral reef as beautiful as the Lakshadweep. I've dived in other parts of the world, okay, and I can tell you that the coral reefs of 1996 among the most beautiful coral reefs I've ever seen. Okay. And I was young. I was a young marine biologist. I didn't know much. I was just going around with my snorkel and my mask. Oh, can all of you swim? Have you all gone snorkeling? Yeah. So the reefs here right now, if you don't know how to snorkel and you don't know how to swim, I recommend you go out tomorrow and go into the water. It's the most beautiful place. Okay. I'm speaking to people over here in my group as well. And if they don't know how to swim, they should go learn and go into the water. It is very, very beautiful. But in 1996, the reefs were really beautiful. They were full of life. Okay. And then 1998 happened. And in 1998, I was working in Africa. I saw that something was happening in Africa. I came to the Lakshadweep. I came immediately to the Lakshadweep. And what I saw was that the corals in the Lakshadweep were completely turning white. Okay. In the same beautiful corals that I saw were completely turning white in a phenomenon that I'm sure most of you have heard by now, which is called bleaching. Have everybody heard about bleaching? Yeah. Okay. So that's great. And so what exactly is bleaching? Do you know what bleaching is? Say it in Malayalam, it's fine. Right. Why does it change its color to white? Does anyone know why it changes its color to white? Okay, so let me explain a little bit. Okay, I think most of you have heard about bleaching, and I think that's very, very good. It's very nice to hear that, because a few years ago, when I came and I asked people what bleaching was, nobody had heard about it. And in 5 or 6 years, people have now heard a lot about bleaching, and that's actually very good. So I explained to you earlier about how the coral had this zooxanthellae, this little animal that was living in it, the plant that was living in it, that zooxanthellae. Now, and the zooxanthellae is producing all the food for the coral, right? Now, when the coral is stressed, and that stress can be lots of things. Okay, if the sea suddenly becomes very salty, okay, or if there's a lot of sediment, lots of sand that comes in, or if the temperatures go up. If the temperatures go up a certain amount, the plant and the coral can't live together anymore. So under conditions of huge amount of stress, okay, what happens is that zooxanthellae just leaves the coral. Okay. So, and that makes the coral white. Why is that? Because the natural color of the coral without the zooxanthellae is white. All the color that you see from the coral, all the colorful corals that you see, is not the coral. It's actually the zooxanthellae, which is in different densities, that cause the coral to be blue or green or brown or all these different colors. Okay. So when the zooxanthellae leaves, the natural color of the coral, which is white, is what is exposed. Now, if the coral is getting 90% of its food from its zooxanthellae and its zooxanthellae is left, what will the coral do? The coral tries its best to feed. Okay. It feeds and it feeds and it feeds, but it's only producing 10% of what it requires. And eventually the coral starves to death. Okay? So it is actually dying of hunger. So the coral dies of hunger. And that's what I saw. So you see, the coral turning completely white. You can see all the polyps that are trying to feed as much as possible. This was a small coral, but then there were some very, very large corals like this. Okay, this was something like 8 or 9 meters in the lagoon of in the reefs of Bangaram. Okay, this coral is a very slow-growing coral, so it probably would have been about 300 or 400 years old. And within a very little time, it died. It died of hunger. Okay. Sometimes when the temperature goes so high, okay, even the fish were dying. Okay, we found that the fish were not able to get enough oxygen, and even the fish were dying. So in very little time, in 1998, okay, the temperatures rose a lot because of a phenomenon that is called the El Nino. Okay, and this beautiful coral that I saw, within about 6 to 8 months, became like this. There was no coral left at all. 70 to 80, in some areas, even 90% of the coral were completely dead and completely barren. Absolutely. This was the worst disaster that had happened to the coral reefs of Lakshadweep. Okay. And I went and I was surveying these areas, and I did not think that the coral reefs of the Lakshadweep would recover at all. And when I went back and I was reading all the scientific papers, everywhere the scientific papers were saying the same thing. Lakshadweep was not the only place in which this happened. Okay. This was happening in Africa, this was happening in Indonesia, this was happening in the Caribbean, this was happening in the Great Barrier Reef, in the Pacific, everywhere. And the scientists were saying, coral reefs are not going to recover from this. This is going to be the end of coral reefs. Many people suggested that in 30 or 40 years, coral reefs may not survive at all. Okay. That was very, very scary. Okay. Think about it. This cement factory that I talked about is suddenly switched off. No more cement factory. Therefore, that entire wall of coral that is built around it is gone. And that's very, very scary. So all of you have heard of climate change, right? The El Nino is essentially one of the results of climate change. We can have a discussion about what the El Nino is later on, about whether it is natural or not. But the point is that as a result of climate change, these ideas, the sea surface temperatures, the surface of the temperatures, the surface of the water is increasing all the time. And in some years, temperatures increase a lot. Okay? And so we have to be very, very aware of that. And climate change is something that is happening everywhere in the world, but on small islands like the Lakshadweep, okay, you have to be very, very careful about climate change. Because islands like the Lakshadweep are the most vulnerable to the effects of climate change. Before climate change affects any other parts of the world, where I live in Mysore, we're not going to get much. We'll get slightly hotter. Okay, that's all. Maybe we can put the fan on and it's no problem. Okay, we'll get slightly less rain perhaps. Okay, it's fine. We have some dams and everything else. But places like Lakshadweep will be affected the most. And when we're saying being affected the most, it will be, how do I say this without scaring people? It can affect your life very seriously. Okay? And we need to understand the importance of reef, this infrastructure of the reef, to understand why it is so important to protect these reefs so much. Okay, so what do you need to survive on a small island? Okay, internet connectivity, you don't need it so much. Okay, it's good to get your WhatsApp messages, but you don't need internet connectivity. You don't need restaurants or hotels. You can survive without them. You can eat at home. Okay, you don't need airstrips. Okay, all of those things you are good to have, but they're not necessary to have. What you need is this: food, you need land, and you need water. 3 things that you need. Okay, if you have this, all the rest is fine. You can get it. Okay, but this is the most important things that you have. That you need to have. And this is given to you by the ecological infrastructure of the coral reef itself. Okay, so I'm using a fancy word for it, which is called biosecurity. Okay, but biosecurity is very simple. It's just this. And what I'm going to tell you is that the biosecurity of the Lakshadweep, okay, to be able to survive on these islands, is all related to having healthy coral reefs. If you have healthy coral reefs, you will have food, you will have land, and you will have water. And this is particularly true of places of the Lakshadweep. And so, of course, so you ask me, how is this possible? Why is it only about the reef? Okay. So with healthy coral reefs is equal to food. You understand that, right? Very easily. We all eat fish. We all love fish very much. Okay. And where does much of that fish comes from? Comes from the coral reefs. It comes from the lagoons. It comes from the coral reefs. Okay. But even more so, in the Lakshadweep, where does most of it? What is the fish that you eat the most? Tuna. Exactly. That doesn't come from the coral reef, right? You don't get so if you don't have a fish on the reef, you can potentially go and get tuna. But do all of you know what you need for tuna? In order to catch tuna, you need bait fish, right? And so, for bait fish, you need to go to the reef. You need to have healthy reefs to be able to get bait fish. So even getting the fish that is out in the open ocean, you are still dependent on your reef for your security, for being able to get food. Okay, so that part of the equation you understand that food, in order to get food, in order to get protein, it is very, very important to keep your reefs healthy. Okay. But the reef is also important when it comes to land security, to be able to keep your land and your beaches safe. Okay, and I'll explain it like this: if I cut the island like this, okay, you understand. So that's the lagoon. Okay, this yellow part is the island, which has coconut trees and your houses. Okay, and that part there is the coral. Okay, it's the outer reef over here. When you go out, you see the waves that are breaking. Right now it's low tide, so you can see the waves that are breaking on the outside. Okay, and as long as this cement factory is actually growing, okay, it produces this wall that is constantly growing all the time. So there will be some death because there are animals, they will die. Okay, there are waves, will break it. Okay, but it will also keep growing. It's like a wall that is a living wall that is constantly repairing itself. Okay, and that green arrow shows you how the wall keeps growing. Now, if it is growing, okay, those waves that are breaking outside there, on the outside outer reef, on the west. Okay, if that wall starts actually declining, what's going to happen? During the monsoon, okay, all those waves will come and they'll affect your island. Okay, and when it affects the islands, what will happen? Okay, you will have a lot of coastal erosion. And when you have coastal erosion, you have to do things like put tetrapods, which don't work. Okay, but you put all these tetrapods there. But instead of having a beach, you'll just have all these cement blocks everywhere. Okay, so there's going to be lots of erosion over there. And so if you don't have your coral reef in a good state, if there's a lot of erosion taking place in the reef wall, if it's dying more than it is growing, okay, you will have your land being very unstable. So when it comes to the land as well, it's important to keep your reef healthy. And similarly, when it comes to your water, okay, exactly. If you have exactly the same thing, that if you have a growing reef wall, okay, your water sources are safe. Okay, you have a well. Everyone has a well at home, and the well has fresh water, but that fresh water is kept fresh just because you don't have the seawater going inside. If the seawater goes in, okay, then that seawater you can have a whole lot of seawater going inside into your wells, okay, and that will cause the wells to become undrinkable. So some people in some parts of the island will already experience this, that the water is still turning salty. Okay, it has a smell. If you go to islands like Bitra, it's very, very difficult. Has anyone gone to Bitra? Nobody you've been to Bitra. And it's very difficult there, right? In islands like Bitra, it's very difficult. The smell of the water is very difficult. It's difficult to drink that water, to drink water or bring it from from your own island. Kavaratti to be able to drink it. Agatti also you have the same problem. In many islands, you have the problem of fresh water, where fresh water is declining and becoming more salty. Even in Kavaratti, water is becoming a problem. There's some parts of the island where there's no problem, the water is still sweet. Okay, but in many parts of the island, it's already beginning to happen. Okay, and and in fact, what I will say is that more than land, your Lakshadweep has very little land. Okay, the land area is like what 32 square kilometers, right? So for 70,000 people, 32 square kilometers is very little. So you think that land is the most important thing, but actually land is not the most important thing. The most important thing is actually fresh water. So if you look at the land area, okay, Kavaratti is 4.2 kilometers square. It has fresh water. Does it have a population? Yes. Okay. Bitra is very small, less than zero point 0.1 square kilometers, but it has some fresh water and people can live there. It's a small population, but they can live there. You look at Bangaram or Tinakara, they have much more land than Bitra, much more land. But nobody can live there, and the reason that they can't live there is because there's no fresh water. Okay? So fresh water is extremely important, and if people can't have to stop living on places like the Lakshadweep and islands of the Lakshadweep, it will be because of fresh water. Okay? So what I've tried to convince you is that when it comes to land, when it comes to food, when it comes to water, the coral reef is extremely important. Keeping the coral reef alive is extremely important. And so I've talked about the coral reef as being a cement factory. When that cement factory closes, okay, then you are having problems. How do you keep that cement factory open? So eventually, the science that we've been doing for 20 years has shown us one very, very simple thing. You have to make sure that that red arrow there, which is erosion, is smaller than the green arrow there. That's all. If the green arrow is large, the red arrow is small, you're fine. Okay? The reefs will keep growing, the cement factory will be open, and all these processes that I was talking about will be kept secure. If in contrast, you have the red arrow increasing in the small and the green arrow becoming smaller for whatever reason, okay, then you'll start having all the problems we talked about, okay, in terms of land, in terms of food, in terms of fresh water. So keeping that cement factory open, we've been studying this now for the last 20, 25 years. And what you need is lots of young coral, okay, lots of little baby corals that should be there all the time, okay. Those corals should grow, and they should grow fast, they should grow well, okay. There should be no disturbance at the time when they are growing. And there should be lots of fish, particularly lots of herbivorous fish like parrotfish, pheasant, pheasant, right? All of those are extremely important to keep the algae down. Okay, they eat up all the algae so that they don't compete with the coral. All right, and so you need all these fish that are eating the plants that are on the coral reef to keep the algae clean. And you also need things like chamam. You need the groupers, you need chamams, you need all those other kuluval and all these other species, okay, that keep all these small creatures like sea urchins down. They eat up all the sea urchins and they keep the reef completely clean. Okay, so having enough of these fish on the reef, along with lots of young coral that are growing fast and no disturbance, is actually very, very important for keeping the reef healthy. Okay, so far, any questions? Or we'll leave the questions for later. Okay.
There are questions.
So we'll talk much more about this if you are interested. But I wanted to take you back to 1998. This is what I saw, right? I saw that the reefs of the Lakshadweep were in this terrible state. Less than 5 to 10% of the coral was left on these reefs. And it was looking very, very bad. All around the world, people were saying that the coral reefs of Lakshadweep are not going to recover at all. So I came back. I was starting my PhD at that time. And I thought that all I would see is that the reefs would go down like this and get even worse. But in 2 years' time, I started seeing this. New coral were coming. By 2000, by the time some of you were born, the coral reefs were recovering really, really well. Okay? By 2006, by 2007, when some of you were 1 or 2 years old, okay, the coral reefs were looking like this. Okay? They were recovering really, really well. Okay? So when you were young, the reefs of the Lakshadweep you were born was really on a path of recovery, and they were among the best reefs in the world in terms of being able to recover from a disturbance that was so much. Nobody could believe how well they were recovering. So we've been tracking this recovery, and what you see is that El Nino happened in 1998, and since then the reefs recovered really well. Okay, so Lakshadweep actually showed that it is capable of recovering even after a major disturbance. Okay. And of course, the question to ask is, why did Rakshadweep reefs recover so well after 98? Nobody expected to. I didn't expect them to recover. Okay. Nobody else in the world expected them to recover so well. And the reason is actually because some of the things that the people in the Lakshadweep were doing. The people in the Lakshadweep were essentially fishing tuna, catching tuna, right? So I told you how important the reef fish are to be able to keep the reef green. After the reefs died in 1998, there were lots and lots of pheasant everywhere. There were lots and lots of parrotfish and surgeonfish everywhere, just keeping it clean. And sometimes when I was diving, I couldn't see the reef because there were so many herbivores just eating up everything. Okay? And so when new coral came, they grew really, really fast. Okay? And so many reefs recovered really quickly. Okay? And they bounced back a lot. And all of this is because people in Lakshadweep were not fishing the reefs very much. You were going and catching small fish for the house, going into the lagoon and catching some lagoon fish and eating it for home. But there was no reef fish being sold. You were essentially eating tuna. And that has been very, very good for the reefs. Okay? And so, I will say this, that tuna fishing can help keep the reefs healthy. Okay? So if any of you, okay, likes tuna fish, just remember, every time you're eating tuna fish, you're actually keeping the reefs very healthy. Okay? You're helping in keeping the reefs healthy. Right? And this was something that happened earlier. People in the Lakshadweep, this is not something that you've been doing for thousands of years, for hundreds of years. Okay? In the past, people were actually fishing chambam. They were fishing small amounts of reef fish. But in the 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s, the fisheries department actually started promoting tuna fishing. Okay? And so many people in the past who are not fishing reef fish, the fisheries department said, go out and fish the tuna. Okay? And so they taught them how to fish the tuna, and everyone became extremely successful in tuna fishing. Tuna fishing became extremely successful, and that's one of the important reasons why the reefs of the Lakshadweep are healthy. Okay? So from reef fish, it went to tuna, and very small amounts of reef fishing was taking place. Now, if any of you go to the junction right now, okay, or in the evenings, you will see that this is changing. Okay? And more people are shifting back to catching reef fish. Okay, so today if you go and you're going to the junction, you will find people catching reef fish, right? Selling reef fish. And once again I will say this: to be very careful about this. I think that to eat reef fish that is caught on your reef and to eat it in Lakshadweep is perfectly fine. Okay, these are your reefs. Okay, and the reefs have been giving you, okay, whatever they are producing. It's fine. But if you look at what is happening to the reef fish that is caught, okay, all very little of it is actually being eaten in Lakshadweep. Okay, what you see in the junction is a very small part. Almost all of it, about 80% of that catch, is all going to the mainland. Okay, so all your reef fish is not being eaten here. Most of it is going to the mainland. Okay, and this is not necessarily a bad thing. You know, fishermen actually need to make their money, right? And as you know, because that's part of their economic livelihoods as well. But we need to ask ourselves whether the reefs of the Lakshadweep can actually take that amount of fishing. Okay, given that there are other alternatives as well. Okay? And what we are seeing, I told you the story about what happened in after '98. Okay, that the reefs recovered like this. You saw that graph earlier. Okay, what we are seeing after that is that more El Nino events took place, and after those El Nino events, the recovery has not been very good. Okay, in fact, on the one hand, this graph is a little. I mean, you have done a little bit of statistics and things, so you understand how to read graphs. Okay, this is how much of mortality there is. Okay, so how much of coral has died during those events, and eventually what it says is that the first time there was a lot, the second time less died, the third time even less died. That's actually a sign of hope. that the less and less coral are dying every time there is a big event. Okay, so that is something to be hopeful for. That means the corals in the Lakshadweep are getting more resistant. They're getting more used to these heating events, and so less coral is dying. But if we look at how much is recovering, the amount of recovery is very, very small. The first time there was a huge amount of recovery every year. The second time that recovery has become much, much smaller. The last time in 2010, when there was another bleaching event, 2016, that recovery is less than 1%. What this means is that for the coral reefs of the Lakshadweep to look what they used to look like before 1998, require at least 30 years. 30 years without any disturbance before the coral reefs recover. Okay? And now just think about how quickly the disturbances are coming. The disturbances are coming once every 4 to 5 years. Okay? So every time it's going to take more and more time for the coral to recover. And the question is, do we have that much time? Already we're beginning to see kind effects. Okay, so if you look at the erosion, okay, the erosion on the reefs, you already see that there's the eastern sides of Kavaratti are beginning to erode. Okay. So one thing that I will say as we are moving on, as I'm closing off, is that we need to actually keep the Lakshadweep's ecological infrastructure safe. Okay. Yes, all these developments that are coming to the Lakshadweep are fantastic. Okay. They will make your lives visibly better. You will get better internet connectivity. You will get better roads. You will get more tourists coming in and potentially more money as a result of that. But in order for all of that to happen, you need to make sure that that ecological infrastructure, I talked about the coral reefs, but it's also about the lagoon. It's also about what is happening to freshwater. Okay? It's all these natural things that are there on your island, which are these invisible parts of keeping the island safe. Okay? And those are the things that you need to conserve. And I'm saying that you need to conserve it because people like us, we are too old, we don't have energy. Okay? In a few years' time, we will stop coming to the islands, or we won't have we'll have other things to worry about. But it is, I think adults of your age that are going to have to make the changes. And you will have to demand the changes that you want. Okay? What kind of future do you want for the Lakshadweep is going to be completely dependent on you. Okay? And while I think when you're thinking about all the infrastructure demanding, the development, okay? When we're thinking about development, I think we need to think about this as part of our development. That this is part of a secure development, which recognizes that there are certain boundaries, and those boundaries are ecological boundaries, and we need to make sure that they are safe. Okay? And finally, I'll say one thing, that in understanding what this ecological infrastructure, some of the important points of the ecological infrastructure, there are 2 points that you should remember. The first is that everything is connected. Okay? That this little turtle that is crawling out of its shell, sometimes you see it on the eastern on the beaches here. Okay, it will make its way through the seagrass meadows. It will go through the coral reef. It will then swim out into the open ocean and go for thousands of kilometers, and then it will come back to the coral reef, spend some time there, come into the lagoon, and back onto the beach. It is connected to all these different systems. Okay, in the ecological systems in Lakshadweep are highly connected to each other. Okay? Every part of it is connected to each other. So you can't just take one part and expect that everything else will remain the same. Okay? That you make changes in one place, you will see changes happening elsewhere. So you have to be very, very careful, recognizing that at ecological infrastructure, everything is connected, and you need to know how those connections work. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that they are surprising. That they're not simple linear things that, okay, you increase the disturbance a little bit, and the health of the system will go down. Sometimes they behave in strange ways. Okay? You increase the disturbance a little bit and nothing changes. Then you increase the disturbance only a little bit, suddenly everything collapses. Okay? Then you reduce the disturbance and it doesn't go back to normal. Okay? Sometimes once it collapses down there, you might not recover at all. Okay? So that's very important. It's important that to keep it secure, you need to recognize that sometimes ecosystems behave like this. Okay? And as a result, you need to make sure that they are always at the top there, always secure, okay, and that your ecological infrastructure is kept safe for your future. That's what I want to say. Any questions? So the question that was asked was what the El Nino is. Okay, so El Nino is a slightly complex problem, but essentially it's this. Okay, you have a whole bunch of these of the winds which are called the trade winds. Okay, that are blowing in the Pacific Island. Okay, in the Pacific Ocean, and these trade winds, okay, push a whole lot of this hot water towards the coast of South America. Okay, and in normal years, that wind keeps that hot water in the Pacific coast, on the coast of South America. In some years, what happens is those winds they fail. Okay, for whatever reason they weaken. So now you have this whole body of hot water that is not along the coast of South America. Okay, what happens to the hot water? It just spreads across the Pacific. Okay, this happens somewhere around December or so. Okay, and once that hot water comes along, it comes into the Indian Ocean by March, April or so, and by May, the temperatures across Pacific and the Indian Ocean suddenly increase a lot. Okay, and that changes current systems, so it increases by 2 or 3 degrees. What's happening now is those winds are failing very, very often, and then together with sea, and that's as a result of climate change. Okay, the El Nino therefore affects. It changes the air system, so it changes not just what's happening in the water, it also changes what is happening in the air. Okay, so it is associated with droughts, so you will have much less rainfall. It completely disrupts the entire wind system within the Indian Ocean. Okay, and when it comes to coral reefs, it also causes the coral reefs to die. Okay. So very, very broadly, that's what the El Nino is. So earlier, the El Nino is a natural phenomenon. It used to happen, the very intense El Ninos used to happen once every 20 to 30 years. Okay, at the beginning part of the last century, okay, El Ninos used to occur naturally once every 20 to 30 years. After, after the year 2000, El Ninos have begun to occur once every 4 to 5 years. So the frequency has increased a lot, and that is what is so scary. That's happening at such a large scale that you can't do much about it until we actually solve the larger problem of climate change. Other questions? Yes. So, what's your name? So, Mohammed is asking a very important question. He says that as a result of the El Nino and the destruction of the corals, will the islands sink into the ocean? Now, it's an important question. Okay, and the answer I will give you is that it depends. Okay, it depends a lot on the decisions and the directions that people take. Okay, to some extent, some part of it is of course because of global climate change, and that people in Lakshadweep can't do anything about that unless you become politicians. Okay, but there are things that you can do locally to make sure that your islands are kept safe. And I think that's what I was trying to talk about. There is a real possibility, Mohammed, that life is going to potentially get a little bit more difficult as the sea levels rise, okay, and the corals start dying. Okay, that is one of the realities of living in a small island. I cannot deny that. Okay, what is going to happen in say 40, 50, 60 years, okay, is that some of your beach areas are going to be a little bit more difficult to live. Okay, you're going to have to find ways to deal with fresh water. Okay? You need to find ways to deal with managing your fresh water slightly better. You need to find ways to managing your fish and your resources slightly better. There'll be a whole lot of those kind of effects. Okay? But what I believe is that people, and particularly people in the Lakshadweep, have a huge ability to adapt. Okay, they're able to adapt to all these changes, and I think that is what we need to focus on. And your generation in particular are going to have to learn how to make those kind of adaptations, to learn to live with climate change as your reality, because that is a reality you can't do away with. But you'll need to find new ways of living with nature, right? What to find sustainable ways of living with nature, and then the most important question to ask is, what do you consider to be a good life? Okay, uh, is that dependent on having high-speed internet, or is it dependent on being able to live, to live securely without the fear of your islands drowning? Okay, so the short answer is there is the danger that this might happen, but it is not. It is dependent completely on decisions that people make. Okay, about how far down the road that is going to take place. Okay. What's your name? Rimza.
Is there anything that we students can do to conserve our forest?
Oh, yes, absolutely. As I'm saying that I don't think that the old people can do anything. I think that if I think you need to be the people who do something about protecting the coral. And when I say protecting the coral reef, I'm saying not just protecting the coral reef, protecting your island as well. Okay. The first thing is you need to talk to your parents about speaking to the administration, speaking to your politicians, speaking to your panchayats about making sustainable choices, right? About making decisions about how to manage your fresh water. Okay. See, all the traditional systems that you had of managing fresh water, okay, you should revive those. Certainly try to revive those. Okay, and you see many of the wells that are in a bad condition. Those are the things that you need to maintain. Okay, I think developing a certain love for your system will help you become more and more active in asking for those changes. Okay, so the people who will make the changes is not the people sitting in the front row, but people sitting in the back. And I think you people need to come to the front row and start taking charge. Yeah. In Malayalam is no problem. So one thing I'll do is often there'll be problems in because of the language and things like that. So one of my researchers here is Kevin, and he's also been talking and thinking a lot about this. So probably Kevin, you can also say a few words.
Hi. നിങ്ങൾക്ക് റോഹൻ ഇപ്പൊ ഈ പ്രസന്റേഷൻ എടുത്തതിന്റെ അകത്ത് ഒരു ഏകദേശം എത്ര മനസ്സിലായിട്ടുണ്ടാവും? അതായത് ഡൗട്ടുകൾ ഇല്ലെങ്കിൽ അതിന്റെ അർത്ഥം ഒന്നെങ്കിൽ എല്ലാം മനസ്സിലായി അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഒന്നും മനസ്സിലായില്ല. അപ്പൊ ഇത് ഏത് സൈഡിലാണ് നമ്മളുള്ളത്? ഇപ്പൊ ഫുള്ള് മനസ്സിലായി. അപ്പൊ എന്തെങ്കിലും ഒരു 10% ഡൗട്ട് ഉണ്ടാവും. നിങ്ങൾ തമ്മിലൊന്നും സംസാരിച്ചിട്ട് ഒരാളോട് ചോദിച്ചാലും മതി, എല്ലാവർക്കും കൂടെ കോമൺ ആയിട്ട് ഒരു ഡൗട്ട് ചോദിച്ചാലും മതി. ഇത് നമ്മള് ക്ലാസ്സിലെ പോലെ അങ്ങനെ നിർബന്ധിച്ചിട്ട് നമ്മൾ ചോദിക്കണമെന്നില്ല. നിങ്ങൾക്ക് എന്തെങ്കിലും ഉണ്ടെങ്കിൽ, ഇല്ലെങ്കിൽ പിന്നെ നമ്മളിപ്പോ അങ്ങോട്ട് ക്വസ്റ്റ്യൻ ചോദിക്കാം. ഇങ്ങനെ ഒരാളെ എടുത്തിട്ട് സൂസാന്തിലെ എന്താണ്? കേൾക്കുന്നില്ല? മൈക്ക് തരട്ടെ? കുഴപ്പമില്ല. നിങ്ങൾക്ക് എന്തെങ്കിലും ഇപ്പൊ ചോദിക്കാനുണ്ടെങ്കിൽ ചോദിക്കാം. ഇല്ലാന്നുണ്ടെങ്കിലും ഞങ്ങളെല്ലാവരും ഇവിടെ ദ്വീപിലുണ്ടാവും, കവരത്തിയിൽ തന്നെ ഉണ്ടാവും മിക്കവാറും. സയൻസ് ആൻഡ് ടെക്നോളജി ഡിപ്പാർട്ട്മെന്റിന്റെ കൂടെ തന്നെയാണ് വർക്ക് ചെയ്യുന്നത്. അപ്പൊ നിങ്ങൾക്ക് ഇവിടെ ആരാണെങ്കിലും റീച്ച് ഔട്ട് ചെയ്ത് കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ എന്ത് ഡൗട്ട് ഉണ്ടെങ്കിലും ഏത് സമയത്ത് നമുക്ക് ക്ലിയർ ചെയ്യാം. അപ്പൊ ഇതുപോലെ ദ്വീപിനെ കുറിച്ചുള്ള നമ്മുടെ വാരയെ പറ്റി മാത്രമല്ല, വാരയെ പറ്റിയും അതിന് ചുറ്റുമുള്ള മീനുകളെ പറ്റിയും, അതുപോലെ തന്നെ ഈ ഉണ്ടായതിന്റെ പറ്റി, ഇവിടെ ആളുകൾ ആദ്യം വന്ന് താമസിച്ചത്, എങ്ങനെയാണ് ആ താമസം ഉണ്ടായത്, അതിനുശേഷം ഇതുവരെയുള്ള ചരിത്രം, ഇങ്ങനത്തെ കുറെ കാര്യങ്ങൾ ആധാരമാക്കിയിട്ട് ഞങ്ങളുടെ ടീം കുറച്ച് ചിത്രങ്ങളും കുറച്ച് ഇൻഫർമേഷനും ഒക്കെ ആയിട്ട് ഒരു കോമിക് സീരീസ് പ്ലാൻ ചെയ്യുന്നുണ്ട്. അപ്പൊ ഒരു അടുത്ത മാസമൊക്കെ ആകുമ്പോഴത്തേക്ക് ഞങ്ങളത് വാട്സാപ്പ് വഴി ആൾക്കാരിലേക്ക് എത്തിക്കാനാണ് പ്ലാൻ ചെയ്യുന്നത്. മേലെയും കീഴേ, അതാണ് ഞങ്ങളുടെ കോമിക്കിന്റെ പേര്. മേലെയും കീഴേ, അതായത് നമ്മുടെ ദ്വീപിന് മുകളിലുള്ള കാര്യങ്ങളും കടലിനടിയിലുള്ള കാര്യങ്ങളും. അപ്പൊ ഇത് രണ്ടും ഒരുപോലെ നമുക്ക് മനസ്സിലാക്കാൻ വേണ്ടി നമ്മൾ വാട്സാപ്പ് വഴി കുറച്ച് കോമിക്സും കാര്യങ്ങളും ഷെയർ ചെയ്യുന്നുണ്ടാവും. അപ്പൊ അതെന്തായാലും നിങ്ങളിലേക്കൊക്കെ എത്തും എങ്ങനെയെങ്കിലും. എല്ലാവരും ഫോൺ ഉപയോഗിക്കുന്നവരല്ലേ? അപ്പൊ എല്ലാവരോടും എത്തിക്കോളും. 2 ഫോൺ വെച്ച്. അപ്പോ ആ സമയത്തും നിങ്ങൾക്ക് ഞങ്ങളുടെ അടുത്തേക്ക് റീച്ച് ഔട്ട് ചെയ്യാം. എന്തെങ്കിലും കാര്യങ്ങളൊക്കെ ഉണ്ടെങ്കിൽ, നിങ്ങൾക്ക് ഇൻട്രസ്റ്റിംഗ് ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഐഡിയാസും കാര്യങ്ങളും ഉണ്ടെങ്കിൽ അത് ഞങ്ങളോട് പറയാം. അതും നമുക്ക് കോമിക്സ് ആക്കാൻ പറ്റും. അപ്പൊ എന്തായാലും അടുത്ത മാസം അത് വരുന്നുണ്ടാവും. ഞാനിപ്പോ മൈക്ക് സാറിന് തിരിച്ചു കൊടുക്കട്ടെ? ശരി, താങ്ക്സ്.
So thank you very much for coming and for being so patient. Okay, I hope that you. And if you have any other questions, please come and ask us. Okay.
Dr. Rohan is from NCF, Mysore. Dr. Rohan, you have delivered a wonderful speech. It's very interactive, very, very informative, as well as the inspiring. So I hope it will benefit to the students for their improving their knowledge in coral as well as the conservation part. And hope the next time they will ask so many questions. They may not be prepared. They may not be expected this kind of presentation. Maybe a milestone or something they expected, so that they are not prepared. So next time definitely they will ask questions. They will watch your whatever that movie. But yeah. Miriam Cave. Yeah, Miriam Cave. Okay, thank you for delivering this wonderful speech. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay,